Welcome to the Membership Guys podcast. Kick-ass advice and tips for membership site owners.
Welcome to episode 231 of the Membership Guys podcast. I'm your host, Mike Morrison, one half of the Membership Guys, and you are listening to the number one podcast for proven practical tips and advice on growing a successful membership business. Today, we're talking about how to deal with a downturn in your membership. So by this, we mean a drop in sales, a slowing down of member signups, maybe a drop in revenue, perhaps even a slowdown in your overall growth rate. So the amount by which you've been growing month on month is slowing down, it's reducing gradually. So an actual downturn in business performance when it gets down to the numbers. So if that's happening, how do you deal with it? The first thing you need to do is to thoroughly assess the situation. You want to make sure that you're not overreacting to anything. Is this actually a trend or a blip? If you've been consistently getting the same number of signups every single month, and then a month comes where you get 5 signups fewer than normal, that isn't a downturn. That's most likely a blip. A downturn is something that is experienced over time. I would say you need to establish some sort of consistent downward trend over a period of 2 to 3 months, as opposed to just panicking the second that something doesn't go the way that you think it should. Being able to see whether this drop in performance or this slowdown is consistent or not is important. Is that the case? Is it a trend? Or is this something that's completely out of the ordinary? And what are we actually talking about here? So if you're reacting to a drop in revenue, what does that actually mean? You need to dig deeper into the numbers to assess the situation. Is a drop in revenue due to lower sales? Is it due to maybe you've got the same amount of sales, but a higher number of people are joining on a discount or a free trial than usual, and so that's resulting in less revenue for the same number of sales? Maybe we're talking about higher churn. Or is it a little bit of both? You need to get the full picture of what is actually happening, what is the problem, rather than just looking at the broad situation and thinking, okay, things are slowing down or there's a problem here. You need to dig into it to actually get some cold, hard facts on what the situation is that you're dealing with before you push forward on trying to find a solution. From there, you need to look to see whether there's an obvious cause. So again, if we're talking lower sales, are we talking higher churn or lower revenue, slower growth, then is there something that you can actually point your finger at and say, yes, this is a clear reason for this? A good example would be if you've experienced more failed payments than usual. So if you're experiencing high churn or maybe a drop in revenue, but your churn rate and your sales haven't actually changed, then a higher amount of payment failures would be a straightforward explanation. It's a pretty obvious cause, and it's a simple enough situation to deal with because you can point right at it and say, this is the root of the issue, and then you can investigate the actual steps to take to remedy that situation. Again, if we're talking obvious causes, have you stopped running ads? Have you had a fallout with an important affiliate who usually drives a certain percentage of your sales? Have you raised your prices? Again, this is the sort of thing that would generally create an instantaneous reaction, a sudden drop in sales, a sudden drop in revenue. Again, these are all things where you can very quickly connect the dots between cause and effect, and as such, it should be obvious how to deal with them. If you stop running ads and your sales dried up, start running ads again, right? Simple. Now, unfortunately, not all downturns in business performance will be quite so simple, but you need to start with that obvious stuff first, because sometimes we can actually skip past that and start looking for deeper problems when the truth is you've just had twice as many failed payments this month and it's a blip. Okay, it's also very, very important to get some context. You don't want to overreact. You don't want to knee-jerk. Is this situation actually as bad as you think? So again, if you're accustomed to getting 100 member sales every single month, and then one month you get 98, that's not a downturn. That's just a standard kind of variance that you're still in the same kind of ballpark area, in the same way that getting 102 sales wouldn't suddenly be a surge. Sometimes we need a little bit of context to actually see, are we overreacting? Is this a problem? Or is it just, we just fell a little bit short of expectations? Those expectations are important because, again, if you are unrealistic in terms of the rate at which you feel you should be growing, if you think your membership should be going up by 1,000 new people every single month, and maybe, you're just getting started, you have quite a small audience, the expectations might not be aligned with reality. And so again, you need to be totally objective and get some context in assessing whether this is a big problem or whether it maybe just needs you to adjust what you're expecting or adjust how you react to things. You also need to account for all of the factors as well. So one example that we see coming up where we see people are panicking because they think they've had a really terrible month, or they think, that they're at the start of a major downturn, is where someone has suddenly had a spike in their churn rate. But actually, when you look closer, that spike in churn was preceded by a spike in sales. Now, of all the people who join your membership site, even if the average member stays for 7, 8, 9 months, there'll always be a percentage of people who join and then leave within their first month. And so if you have a month where you get twice as many sales as you would expect, then naturally, the next month, you are going to see more cancellations as a percentage of those new members who are always, they're going to drop out in their first month. You're always going to have that. But, if 5% of all members drop out in their first month, you get 100 sales. That means month 2, you lose 5 people. You get 200 sales. It means month 2, you lose 10 people. That's double your churn. So if you just look at that, if you just look at that part of the situation, oh my God, my churn has doubled, then of course panic is going to set in. But you need that context of what has preceded this, what has led up to this, what are the factors are involved in order to more accurately assess what's going on. Because actually, so twice the amount of people left this month, but the reason was this. It was because you got higher sales. So that's just an example of situations in which a bit of context and a bit of broader understanding of cause and effect is needed. You also need to remember that looking at monthly stats, as so many of us do, that's a totally arbitrary window. A good experiment to do to, again, identify, is this a blip or is this a downturn, is just try moving the goalposts, move that window. So if you look at stats from the 1st of the month to the 30th of the month, and those stats paint a bleak picture, if you moved that window to be from the 15th of one month to the 15th of the next, would things be so bad? Is it just that you happen to have a bad day for sales on the 1st and a bad day for sales on the 30th? And so you've got 2 bad sales days in a month, where if you just move the goalposts in one direction or the other, it wouldn't look so bad. It's just an unfortunate circumstance of choosing a start date and an end date for the period that we're actually analyzing stats from. Hopefully that makes sense. That arbitrariness of deciding that we're going to base our assessment of a situation on one fixed point and between that fixed point and another fixed point. Again, you have to play around with where those points are to get a better feel for whether this is a legitimate problem or not. Because we need to make sure this isn't a knee-jerk reaction. You need to question what it is that you're basing your interpretation that this is a downturn on. Sometimes people overreact to even the slightest hint of a problem, and sometimes people forget that this isn't a scientific equation. If you got 1,000 leads last month and from that 100 people became members, that doesn't mean that if you get 1,000 this month, exactly 100 people are going to become members again. It doesn't work like that. It's not a scientific or a mathematical equation. There are so many other factors at play. So you need to make sure you're not overreacting and that you actually step back and get some context on the situation. So you've got to assess the situation, you've got to look for the obvious cause, then you've got to get some context. You also need to think, has this happened before? If you look back over the months and years, does this happen maybe seasonally? Does it happen this month every single year? That's something that cuts both ways. So, if you launched your membership site in September and you maybe got an initial influx of members and some of those bought an annual membership, chances are every September, your revenue is going to be a little bit higher because you probably have more renewals taking place that month than usual. So that's a pattern. And you need to look over a longer period of data in order to actually see, okay, is what I'm reacting to here just normal for this time of year, or is it actually out of the ordinary? And is it part of a downward spiral? How does this compare to past years and so on? Some memberships, some topics are seasonal. Memberships that cater towards teachers, for example, or maybe memberships that are for sports enthusiasts. Their different membership levels, their performance is seasonal because the topic is seasonal in most cases. And so, again, you need to think about stuff like that. We also need to remember that there's usually a bit of a lag in seeing results when it comes to memberships. It's a bit like turning an oil tanker. The effects of the things you do today probably won't actually reveal themselves for several months. A lot of the things like churn in particular are lagging indicators. So if you make a major change to your business today and then you look at your stats and, over the next couple of weeks and you say, oh, great, that change didn't impact me. Truth is, the impact is probably only going to be revealed 3 months, 6 months, 12 months down the line. So again, you need to take that broader scope, that longer view of what has happened within your business and appreciate that a downturn now might not be a result of things that have happened yesterday, this week, this month. So thinking like this and getting the context will help you to get to the root of whether you are indeed in a bit of a downturn or whether this is simply something that is par for the course when it comes to your membership. Now, if all signs do suggest that this is a downturn, then the next thing you need to do is to triage the situation. We need to find the cause. If it wasn't an obvious cause like we talked about earlier, like a spike in failed payments, you need to get deeper. We need to identify the root problem. And that means you need to look at data. You need to look at feedback. Are you getting less traffic? Are you getting fewer leads? Has your conversion rate dropped? Is there less engagement in your membership? If you're just looking at sales or revenue, that doesn't tell you the problem. If you're looking at your sales figures and you're bemoaning the fact that this month you only got 10 sales, if you've got 1,000 leads and those only resulted in 10 sales, that's a conversion problem. If you've got 11 leads and those resulted in 10 sales, that's a lead generation problem, more likely a traffic problem. So again, if you're just focusing on the headline, if you're just focusing on the outcome and assessing the performance of the outcome compared to previous outcomes, you need to go further back in the process than that. Is this a problem with traffic? Has your traffic dropped off? Is it a problem with leads? Maybe the tool that you use to capture email signups, maybe that's defective. That is actually something that's happened before for us with the membership guys. We noticed that our average daily sales had just started dipping a little bit gradually. And then when we looked into it, it looked like actually we'd had a drop off in the number of email signups. And that told us we needed to look at the email signup process, and that identified a little bit of a bug with the platform we were using to collect leads. So it's so important to triage the situation and find where the actual problem is in order to be able to zero in on the root cause. Think about whether you've made any major changes. Again, remember the lag that we talked about. A downturn now may be a result of something you changed 3 to 6 months ago. If you've closed a Facebook group, stopped a podcast, changed your email strategy, changed your content strategy, or changed, what you're putting into your membership, you might not feel the pinch from those things until 6 months down the line. As we said, we've already talked about the obvious stuff, but because of that lagging factor, you mightn't spot the root issue. So think further back to see where that issue might be and determine what you can do to resolve it. It's always funny and a little frustrating to us. We'll see people who maybe a big part of why they got to where they got to was that they were running a podcast and it was a popular podcast. Then they make the decision to cancel that podcast, and a week later or a month later, they publish an article basically saying, we cancel our podcast and the sales kept coming. And so what a great decision that was. Now we're doing less work and we're still getting the same amount of sales. And then 6 months later, they start that podcast back up because they realize that the negative impact, the effects of that action weren't immediately felt. It takes a little bit of time. Have you done anything in the past, within the last 3, 6, 12 months, that might fall into that kind of situation we're talking about? Try to formulate a timeline of what has been going on in your business, any major changes that have been made that may have lit the touch paper for the downturn that you're currently experiencing. So you need to look at the data. You need to establish that timeline of major changes, accounting for the lagging in performance and in the cause and effect when it comes to memberships. You also need to get feedback. You need to hear from your audience. The people who are on your list, consuming your free stuff but not joining. Why aren't they joining? Is it related to anything that you're doing differently now compared to before? The people who left your site, if your churn has gone up, why are they leaving? What's changed for them? Ask them this stuff. This sort of feedback is essential to have so you can assess it alongside the data and alongside that timeline of changes and activity within your business. Dealing with a downturn, if you've established that it is legitimately a downturn and that you're not just being overly analytical or you're not just overthinking things, it really is all about figuring out that root cause. And sometimes you can't find a cause because there's no downturn. Again, remember that lag. It may actually be, perhaps you had 6 phenomenal months where you were actually overperforming as a result of something that you did a year ago. But again, you just thought it was natural, organic growth because the cause and the effect had a little bit of a delay between them. Again, you've got to be more analytical. You've got to back up your interpretation of performance with some data, with some feedback. It's so important to really objectively assess what's going on in your business, whether this is a blip, whether it's just part of the ebb and flow of running a membership or of running any sort of business where you're always going to have those little peaks and troughs. And if it is clear that this is a growing negative trend, that your business is steadily heading in the wrong direction, then it's all about digging and digging into data, into feedback, and assessing what has been going on in the past several months within your business to identify the root cause of that issue. And only when you do that can you start to formulate a plan for remedying that problem and turning things around within your membership. So hopefully this has given you some good food for thought. Hopefully it's given you stuff to go on if you're feeling like things are heading in the wrong direction in your membership when it comes to sales, when it comes to churn, engagement, and growth. And, I labor so much around the importance of thoroughly assessing what this is, what is happening. Is this really a downturn? Because actually, once you get into the weeds on this, and once you start digging into data and seeking feedback and building out that timeline of changes and stuff, that can actually take up a lot of your time and it can take a lot of your attention. It can be stressful trying to triage and weed out the problem. So you don't want to get sent down that rabbit hole if actually what you're experiencing is just normal. Your churn is up because last month your sales were up and the two are connected. Or, your sales have dropped because it's Christmas and no one joins memberships within your industry at Christmas. And if you'd looked back over the past 4 or 5 years, you would see that this is consistent and this is pattern and this is seasonal. So anyway, hopefully this has been helpful. Hopefully this is helping you to navigate those periods in your business where things aren't necessarily going the way you think they should be. As always, I'd love to hear your feedback. And if you do have any further questions on this topic, hit me up on social. Best place to do that is inside our free Facebook group at talkmemberships.com. talkmemberships.com. If you type talkmemberships.com into your browser, it redirects to our group, or you can just search for Membership Mastermind on the Facebook app. And of course, if you are a member of Membership Academy, then we always, as you know, have deeper discussions about each week's podcast episode within our community too. So I'd love to hear any further thoughts. If you've been through a bit of a downturn, what helped you turn it around? What helped you spot the problem? Any feedback, any thoughts, any follow-up questions? I'd love to chat a little more about this with you in our communities, whether it's our Facebook group or within membershipacademy.com. That is it from me for this week. I'll be back again next week with another installment of the Membership Guys podcast. If you enjoyed this week's episode of the Membership Guys podcast, we invite you to check out membershipacademy.com. The Membership Academy is the essential resource for anyone at any stage of starting, growing, and running a membership website. Whether you're still trying to figure out what your idea is going to be, or whether your website is already up and running and you're just looking for ways to grow it and attract new members, then the Membership Academy can help you to get to the next level. With our extensive course library, monthly training, exclusive member-only discounts, perks, and tools, and a supportive, active community to help you along the way with feedback, encouragement, and advice, the Membership Academy is the perfect place to be for anyone looking to start, manage, and grow a successful membership website. Check it out at membershipacademy.com.